As I remember it, one spring day when I was in 5th grade, our family gathered around the TV to watch a special news report with Walter Cronkite. The report went on and on about this man that I'd never heard of. And so I turned to my father and I asked, Dad, who's this Martin Luther King guy they're talking about? And why did someone shoot him? My dad's response with surprisingly somber reverence was something like, you never heard of Martin Luther King? He was a civil rights leader. They don't teach you about him at school. He was killed fighting for rights for people. And I was all of 10 at the time, and I doubt my parents had mentioned Dr. King to me, so I'm not sure that the school system had failed me. There's much power in the telling of this story because my father was and is politically very conservative. But back in the day, Martin Luther King Jr.'s work transcended politics. The whole civil rights movement by 1968 had a way of transcending politics. Dogs and water hoses, police batons and bombs, bloodying and beating up, maiming and killing nonviolent protesters, simply seeking rights that others took for granted, had a way of superseding conservative, moderate, and liberal boundaries. Only those invested in racism and segregation, only those unwilling to see all humans treated as equal, could not empathize with victims of racial oppression that had long been an ugly hallmark of our country. And I know it sounds harsh, but by 1968, only the misguided and the ignorant were unable to see that God's love was calling us as a nation to stop that oppression. God and the world had long ached for an end to segregation, and in 1968 we could see it coming about. And Martin Luther King Jr. was a brave and eloquent leader, one of the heroic faces that brought this nation to that point where we were finally, as a whole, listening and hearing that call from God, and we were acting on it. Powerful stuff. And there's even more personal power in the telling of my experience that sad April day. Something profound happened to me that day. I learned of Martin Luther King's assassination, and I heard about civil rights. A seed was planted and watered and began to sprout. And I became quite curious about the civil rights movement, and over time I became captivated by it. Over the years, I learned more and more about civil rights. And early on, one thing I remember standing out, something that clicked in my young mind, was that the words of the Pledge Allegiance we said every day at school were a solemn pledge, not just to a flag, but to this republic with liberty and justice for all. It was simply obvious to me as a child that ideal was not fully played out in our nation's day-to-day activities. Liberty and justice for all was an ideal, a promise that I could not let go of, and I've never been able to let go of. It's influenced my life ever since. That ideal is part and parcel of the Bible. It's part of the Hebrew reading that we heard from Amos, a text that Reverend King was quite fond of quoting. You may recall in his I Have a Dream speech, one of the most passionate lines is, "We will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream." Reverend King was referring to African Americans stripped of selfhood, denied votes, and subjected to brutality and grave and awful injustices. But his use of Amos summarizes God's call for all of us. None of us should be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. Indeed, as the gospel reading illustrates, Jesus commands his followers to do to others as you would have them do to you. We all want to be provided justice and righteousness. In America, we are taught that it is due us as an inalienable right, and we pledge that it is due to all, liberty and justice for all. In the civil rights movement in the 50s and the 60s, the Reverend King led. Indeed, every civil rights movement has been about just that. But Reverend King's ministry was not just about advocating Jesus' command and the gospel reading that we do to others as we would have them do to us. Amazingly, he used the rest of Jesus' commands in Luke 6:27-30 as the means by which to accomplish it. Here again, the words of Jesus in those verses. I say to you that listen, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you. If anyone strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. And from anyone who takes away your coat, do not withhold even your shirt. Give to everyone who begs from you. And if anyone takes away your goods, do not ask for them again. Do to others as you would have them do to you. If we think about it, Reverend King used the first set of commands as a means to bring about the last command, to do to others as you would have them do to you. Simply put, he used non-violence, pacifism, to resist the violence and oppression and the violence of brutality, and ultimately to end the system of terrorism of African Americans in this country. As Reverend King put it, true pacifism is not non-resistance to evil, but non-violent resistance to evil. You see, and this is a critical point of Jesus' command and Reverend King's word. Non-violence resistance to evil and oppression and violence is not submission to evil or oppression or violence. What it is love-oriented resistance with great power. To quote Martin Luther King again, love is the most durable power in the world. And for both Jesus and Morton, the bottom line is that we must pursue peace through peaceful means. We must pursue peace through peaceful means. There's no other option to bring about peace. No other option. None. And Reverend King's voice continues to cry out to us this truth. And for us as Christians, it is of utmost importance that we understand that Reverend King's reverberating voice from the 50s and 60s is an echo of the voice of Christ. And one of my favorite quotes from Reverend King, he preached, through the vista of time, a voice still cries out to every potential Peter, put up your sword. The shores of history are white with the bleached bones of nations and communities that failed to follow that command. Again, let me stress that doing as Jesus commanded and putting up the sword does not mean dropping resistance. It means resisting with the durable strength of the power of love. And that strikes us as odd. I know. We think love means we have to like. That's not the case. Reverend King had to wrestle with this mistaken notion by folks questioning how we can love enemies, especially the ones who do egregious wrong. He explained in his book, The Strength to Love, and this is a long quote, but I'd be remiss if I didn't quote King a lot in this sermon. The meaning of love is not to be confused with some sentimental outpouring. Love is something much deeper than emotional bosh. Perhaps the Greek language can clear our confusion on this point. In the Greek New Testament, there are 3 words for love. The word eros is a sort of aesthetic or romantic love. The second word, philia, a reciprocal love, and the intimate affection and friendship between friends. We love those whom we like, and we love because we are loved. And the third word is agape, understanding and creative, redemptive goodwill for all. An overflowing love which seeks nothing in return. Agape is the love of God operating in the human heart. At this level, we love others not because we like them, nor because their ways appeal to us, nor even because they possess some type of divine spark. We love everyone because God loves them. At this level, we love the person who does an evil deed, although we hate the deed that he or she does. Reverend King was actually known for having a sense of humor, and we can hear a bit of it in what he writes next. Now, we can see what Jesus meant when he said, love your enemies. We should be happy that he did not say, like your enemies. It's almost impossible to like some people. Like is a sentimental and affectionate word. How can we be affectionate toward a person whose avowed aim is to crush our very being and place innumerable stumbling blocks in our path? How can we like a person who is threatening our children and bombing our homes? That is impossible. But Jesus recognized that love is greater than that. When Jesus bids us to love our enemies, he's speaking neither of eros nor philia. He's speaking of agape, understanding and creative, redemptive goodwill for all. Only by following this way and responding with this type of love are we able to be children of our Father who is in heaven. Reverend King was brilliant, and he was right. We cannot like some folks, but we can love everyone. We can desire the well-being of even the awfulest acting people we know for no other reason than their well-being, physically and mentally, makes for our well-being, for the world's well-being. Moreover, practically speaking, and I'm quoting Martin Luther King Jr. again, returning hate for hate multiplies hate. Adding deeper darkness to a night are already devoid of stars. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. Hate multiplies hate. Violence multiplies violence. And toughness multiplies toughness in a descending spiral of destruction. And so when Jesus says, love your enemies, he's setting forth a profound and ultimately inescapable admonition. Have we not come to such an impasse in the modern world that we must love our enemies or else? Chain reaction of evil, hate begetting hate, wars producing more wars must be broken, or we shall be plunged into the dark abyss of annihilation. And then Reverend King goes on to note that hate not only hurts the one being hated, but hate is just as injurious to the person who hates, like an unchecked cancer, he writes. Hate corrodes the personality and eats away at a vital unity. Hate destroys one's sense of values and objectivity. And finally, Reverend King notes, the third reason why we should love our enemies is that love is the only force capable of transforming an enemy into a friend. We never get rid of an enemy by meeting hate with hate. We get rid of an enemy by getting rid of an enmity. By its very nature, hate destroys and tears down. By its very nature, love creates and builds up. Love transforms with redemptive power. I'm first quoting Abraham Lincoln's, "Do I not destroy my enemies when I make them my friends?" King points out that this is the power of redemptive love. But tomorrow is a day set aside to remember Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the only individual born as an American citizen for whom we have a national holiday. And it speaks volumes of this nation, and it gives me great hope that we honor a man who both headed a movement for civil rights and did it as a spiritual leader, a Christian pastor, dedicated to the most powerful, most durable, most redemptive, most transformative force in the universe, love. The end of 1968 saw sending Apollo 8 around the moon. And the very first view and photos were sent back of an Earthrise. And there in space hung our small, fragile, beautiful planet. Earlier that year here in America, although it was violently and tragically cut short, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. finished his work of taking the Bible, Jesus' teachings, and Gandhi's practices of unconditional love and using them to alter our world. That little sphere suspended in space, and the entire planet is better off for it. And what we need to do is not only remember that, but to take up where Reverend Dr. King left off and spread the practice of unconditional love to alter the world through nonviolent, peaceful resistance for the better. We must love our enemies. We must put up our swords. We must turn the other cheek. And when we do these things, heaven itself breaks in. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. proved this is not just talk, but truth.